In order to prevent and identify cases of suspected child abuse and neglect, it's important to have a clear understanding of exactly what abuse and neglect are. Child abuse can be broadly defined as an adult causing serious physical or psychological harm to a child. Chapter 261 of the Texas Family Code, recodified in 1995, provides definitions of child abuse and neglect for the purposes of civil actions, such as the removal of a child from an abusive circumstance, with the primary goal of protecting children from abusers. There are also provisions in the Penal Code which allow for the criminal prosecution of crimes against children. Abuse is a broad term, which includes many types of behaviors that are harmful to children. There are several major categories of abuse: physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional or psychological abuse, and neglect or abandonment. Let's look at each of these categories in greater detail. The definitions provided are primarily drawn from the Texas Family Code and are directly applicable for child care providers who live and work in the state of Texas. Providers from other states should contact the local child care regulatory agency for more information about where to find legal definitions that apply in your area. The first category of abuse we will discuss is physical abuse. The Texas Family Code defines physical abuse as physical injury that results in substantial harm to the child, or the genuine threat of substantial harm from physical injury to the child. This includes an injury that is at variance with the history or explanation given, but excludes accidents or reasonable discipline by a parent, guardian, or conservator that does not expose the child to a substantial risk of harm. Failure to make a reasonable effort to prevent an action by another person that results in physical injury or substantial harm to the child. The current use by a person of a controlled substance in a manner or to the extent that the use results in physical, mental, or emotional injury to a child, and causing, expressly permitting, or encouraging a child to use a controlled substance. It's important to note the Family Code specifically excludes reasonable discipline by a parent that does not expose the child to substantial risk of harm from this definition of physical abuse. While many experts agree parental spanking is not the optimal form of discipline, it is usually not considered abusive according to Texas law. As a child care provider, you are not allowed to use physical discipline with children. This is based on the minimum standards for child care providers in Texas. Physical abuse can include any act of force that causes a child bodily injury, such as striking, kicking, shaking, burning, pushing, biting, cutting, binding, gagging, scalding, throwing, or choking a child, holding a child underwater, or twisting a child's limbs. Physical abuse sometimes occurs when a parent or caregiver is frustrated or is under a great deal of stress and loses control. Many times the abuser does not actually intend to injure the child, but the effects on the child can still be deep and long-lasting. One noteworthy subtype of physical abuse is abusive head trauma, also called shaken baby syndrome. Abusive head trauma, shaken baby syndrome, deserves further discussion because it is the leading cause of death related to child abuse in the United States. It is usually caused by someone shaking, dropping, throwing, or striking a very young child, generally less than 1 year old. Later in this course, we will discuss measures to prevent abuse in childcare and home settings. Special provisions should be in place for caregivers who work with infants and toddlers to prevent instances of abusive head trauma, shaken baby syndrome. The next category of abuse we will discuss is sexual abuse. Sexual abuse is defined in the Texas Family Code as sexual conduct harmful to a child's mental, emotional, or physical welfare, including conduct that constitutes the offense of indecency with a child, sexual assault, or aggravated sexual assault. Failure to make a reasonable effort to prevent sexual conduct harmful to a child. Compelling or encouraging a child to engage in sexual conduct. Causing, permitting, encouraging, engaging in, or allowing the photographing, filming, or depicting of a child if the person knew or should have known the resulting photograph, film, or depiction of the child is obscene or pornographic. And causing, permitting, encouraging, engaging in, or allowing a sexual performance by a child. In short, sexual abuse is any sexual act that is intended to arouse the abuser, and particularly any sexual activity a child cannot understand or consent to. It can affect both boys and girls, and can happen to children in any age group. It can be a one-time event or can occur over many years. Long-term abuse may escalate over time, especially when the abuser is a member of the child's family. Many times the abuser does not use outright force, but instead uses a number of methods such as threats or bribes to coerce the child into the abuse.